want to talk to the men. I think that I think we can get into the nuances of, how women do this better than men or any of those things. But
Hmm.
it feels like for men in particular, there aren't a ton of outlets rather to voice their levels of loneliness that they are experiencing or even finding friends. And so going back to the church, like how can the church go back to engaging men better, or does it need to? Like what can the church do to re-engage men back in and get them back into community with one another? How can they do that?
Well, Eddie, I think it does start even in a lot of ways from people like you who are willing to talk about the truth. That, like, what does it look like to be a man who wanted to avoid loneliness, but that's changing? Even your own story and what God's been doing in your life is an example to other men. So I think having men lead by example, give testimony to what life is like if we're by ourselves and what life is like when we're pressing into relationship in a healthy way. I think that's huge. And I think testimony and example is one of the most powerful thing for men. I think it's powerful for everybody, but I think a lot of men are looking around and they're going, who do I look up to? Who's an example? Who do I want to follow? And I think there's got to be more examples of that, more stories told of what it's like to live in isolation and what happened when that changed in my life. I think having more men share their stories so it's normative in the church that this is where we're headed. This ought to be the new norm, so that we know that if
Right.
it's not our norm, that's a problem. Like, I think that's a big part of it. I think also we've got to change what men believe. I think there's a lie told that, men fundamentally just don't do relationship, or men
Mm,
fundamentally don't have emotions, or, men really can do it alone, or like all these, like, that's just bull. I mean, it's so wrong. I wanted to say another word, but I held back. It's like, it's horrible. I mean, it's a lie from the enemy.
that's right.
And if we look at Jesus as the ultimate man, this is a man who had deep friendship, who revealed the truth about what he was going through in all its forms. I mean, so emotionally attachable, so truthful, so real, so in need of relationship with his father and some other friends. Like, I mean, I think we got to hold Jesus up as the kind of man that we all want to aspire to, because it's really living. So I think that's some of the work, I think, for churches. I think creating space for men to practice this, to
Mhm.
have safe places to step out and show up. I mean, I think in a lot of cases men have tried to show up and it didn't go well with them. We can talk a little
Mm,
bit about what I think happened to a lot of boys that grew
mm,
up to become men who still aren't men because they're still stuck in a lot of ways, because as boys it
right.
wasn't safe to be needy, it wasn't safe to have emotions, it wasn't safe to be vulnerable. And so we created this hard shell to protect ourselves over the years, and
Mm,
culture just affirms it in many cases. So we just stay in that shell, hiding behind a whole bunch of layers of, yeah, deceit, workaholism, addiction. I mean, all the things you already said. I think
yeah.
those are false. They're false attempts to find meaning, to find significance, to find intimacy. I mean, everything you're made for as a man, when you're going to those things to find it, it will always leave you empty. It will never
Yeah.
satisfy.
So it's almost like before we can even you can certainly we can certainly talk about what the church can do to help draw in men and to create spaces for them for vulnerability and transparency. But also even before that, these little boys, myself included, I remember the phrases I heard growing up from my family. What's wrong with you was like the favorite. Like, well, what's wrong with you? Why are you acting like that? It's almost like putting shame on me for being expressive, or even, hey, boys don't cry. Like a lot of people, especially in older generations, hey, boys don't cry.
Yeah.
Quiet that down. Like, you shouldn't be vulnerable. You shouldn't be sad. You need to figure out how to be a man and earn some money and get past it. How damaging are those phrases
Oh,
that we hear as a kid?
it's terrible. Yeah, I mean, what's crazy, and you know this because we've talked about this before, and you in your own work you've learned this. You're born into
Mm,
the world with the part of your brain that feels 95% developed. It is the only way God's given you to make your needs known, is through your feelings.
Yeah.
crying, you're hurt, sad. I mean, that's why parents are listening for their baby to cry, because it means their brain is working. They can make their needs known. They're going to get their needs met. They're going to survive. And then when they get a
Hmm.
voice, the goal is now that they give language to their feelings so they can be even clearer about the needs that they have, so they can show up with their needs in front of their parents, and their parents will welcome that voice. Like, they're eager to hear their baby cry. They're eager to hear their children say what's going on. They don't want to stifle that. They don't want to diminish that. But what's happened is most of us were told that, like you just said, big boys don't cry.
Hmm.
It's a wimp. You're a wimp if you feel pain. Don't be lonely. Figure out how to take care of yourself. Go find something to do, or I'll give you something to do. Like, I mean, all those kinds of statements taught us to have to do this all by ourselves and not be in a place of need, especially with emotions. But the crazy
Hmm.
thing for a guy is that men's rational brain isn't fully developed till they're 26 to 28. So the means you had to make your needs known relationally were shut down, and the
Hmm.
rational part of your brain doesn't work well enough to do what you need to do to get what you need. So what's crazy is we keep telling people women are more emotional and men aren't, and I would just say we need to flip that. Men need to be more emotionally attuned because it takes them longer to have a brain that will make sense out of this world than women. Theirs is fully developed at 23 to 24, so they're quicker than we are. And I just sit there and
Hmm.
go, man, what have we done to men? And we
Yeah.
literally have
That.
shut down the means that they can actually have relationship. And then we're telling them to think rationally, and they don't. So what do? They learn survival behaviors that turn into addictions, like pornography, like workaholism, or whatever it is that they had to do to shut down their needs so they
Hmm.
can make it through life. That's Most men have become robots because they were told to.
Yeah, this is coping mechanisms, right? So
That's what
it's.
it
I
is.
remember one of the first things doing a lot of therapy and hearing, these are some of the battles I've fought over the years in terms of addiction or in terms of like behaviors. Like one of the things for me was, I ended up playing in the NFL, but it's like okay, and then you go right from the NFL to go plant a church. It's like okay, so Eddie, let me tell you this: you've had an incredibly hard life. You lost your mom at a young age. Your dad left your family. You grew up poor, you grew up impoverished, you grew up getting bullied. And so then what you decided to do was put on a football helmet and become a fullback or a tight end and run through a brick wall for 20 something years. And then once you're
Mm.
done, you go find the next hardest thing you can do spiritually, which is to go plant a church in a really incredibly difficult city. So do you think there's a pattern there that your coping mechanism might be running your head through a wall? It's like,
Hmm.
oh, I guess so. But it's like what I did to survive.
Yeah.
It's like I learned these behaviors. And for some people, they find alcohol or other addiction or pornography or whatever, and they find these things, and these are the things that help them not want to die.
Yeah.
And
That's
that
right.
realization, and so I think we've always been telling men like, what's wrong with you? Figure it out. You need to be better. But understanding that these men are coping with a
Yes.
deep, deep sadness and a deep lot that they have not been allowed and been told they're not allowed to share or experience. And so, like you mentioned, there's this big gap. I'm feeling something, and maybe it's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, whenever it is. Shut that down, and all of a sudden, my rational brain doesn't develop for a decade and a half. No wonder why. And listen to some of these statistics. I
Yeah.
shared them with you. 93% of mass shooters are men.
Yes.
Men are 3 times more likely to overdose. 12 times more likely to be incarcerated. 4 times more likely to commit suicide. More likely to get suspended from school. Most victims of violent crime are men, but most men cause the violent crimes. Most of the homeless are men.
Yeah.
What do you make of statistics like that, Jeff?
Yeah. Well, I think we just described why. Because I mean, Frank, like when you don't have access to the thing that leads you to become aware of your need and therefore move in healthy ways towards God and people to experience true nurture, because transformation, character development, formation, it all happens in a relationship. Healthy, safe relationships where you can show up for who you really are, be loved regardless of where you're at, and then move towards who you're meant to become. When you
Mm-hmm.
don't have that, we should not be surprised at those statistics. That is the
Mm-hmm.
outcome of creating a hard heart. because that's what you're doing. When you tell someone not to have feelings, not to be in need, not to move towards relationship, you are telling them to shut down the center of their very being, that, going back to what we started with in the beginning, was made to feel lonely for people, and then meant to
Mm,
find nurturing relationship that leads them to transformative character. So all
mhm,
those statistics, that's not a surprise at all to me. That
mhm,
we shouldn't be surprised one bit that that's the outcome, especially with men, because that's what they were told at a very young age.
mhm. Well, women have obviously have had been at a tremendous disadvantage in many ways in society over the years. There's no doubt about it. But
Yes,
one of
yeah,
the things that we have done societally for women, is, let's say, at least on a little bit, is say, hey, it's okay for you to be emotional. We can develop those emotions. You can feel things because,
yeah,
quote, maybe it's for the wrong reason, but it's for the right reason. It's like that's how women are. They
mm,
are emotional. They're sensitive. They should love. They cuddle. They nurture, and they should do that. But for men, they're not allowed to do those things. And what seems like we've done is shut off a fundamental developmental piece of boys, then teenagers, and then men. And
yeah,
that has led to certainly some of the practical things we've seen out, but also just the shutting down of being able to be in community with one another. It's
yeah,
almost like you can't, I mean, when someone told me once, you can't just shut off the negative emotions. You also have to shut off the positive ones if you're going to shut down the emotions. And so we've lost not only the ability to get angry or frustrated or whatever, we've lost the ability to love deeply and to be present for one another. And some of these statistics play themselves out in this way, and it's shocking and sad. I don't
yeah,
know what to
yeah.
make of it.
Because unmet or unattended or undealt with emotions or desires are going to find a way, a broken way, but they're going to find a way to get addressed. This is what James is talking
Hmm.
about in James 4. What causes quarrels and fights among you? It's these desires that are waging war within you. You desire, but you do not have. And so
Hmm.
what James is saying is there's these, and I would add to it, your emotions, your feelings are meant to help you discern your desire. Your desire was meant to give you a voice to speak out and then find it in healthy relationship. So if
Hmm.
you don't have that happening, those desires are waging war in you, and they will
Hmm.
find a way to try and be met. Now, they be met in terribly broken ways, which is what you just described. All those statistics are just unmet or unattended desires that are finding their way to something. It's like an oak tree is eventually going to break through a sidewalk to get more water. Its roots are going to do whatever it has to get what it
Hmm.
needs. I think those men are just saying, I have desires in me. I don't even know what they are because someone told me not to pay attention to them. I can't make them known because then I'm vulnerable. So what happens is those desires are going to go somewhere. And when they're not
Hmm.
attended and they're not cared for, they're going to create havoc in your life and they're going to destroy the world around you. That's the only way they get dealt with, because you're not aware of them, you're not paying attention to them, and therefore you're not going to healthy places to find them met. The very first way we see that story is Cain and Abel. Like, it's,
That's right.
he kills his brother, and the story continues all the way through the Bible in the same way, from that first lie that you were meant to
Mm.
figure out how to do all this by yourself.
What a fantastic, sophisticated trick of the enemy to
Yes.
know that you're created for dependence and for healthy emotion, and God's given you emotion to express your need to be
Yeah.
needy, and
Yeah.
then for him to say, "Oh, I don't know if you are all that needy. Maybe
Yeah.
you don't need God, maybe you don't need one another." And for that to play itself out in such horrifying ways, not only in the Bible through, you see it all the time, and certainly Cain and Abel is a great example,
Yeah.
but then to see it play itself out in society, and for us to go, no, let's just keep on this path.
Yeah.
I think this
Yeah.
is working. Like, let's keep being lonely.
Yeah.
This is great.
This
And
is
then,
amazing. Let's tell everybody to not eat anybody so everybody will kill everybody. Like, it's like,
yeah, this is
that's the
great.
outcome of it, right? If I don't need anybody,
Mhm.
then I don't need anybody, which means destroying everyone around me and all the relationships is the outcome of that. I mean, it's foolishness, absolute foolishness.
Yeah, it is. And we even glorify it. So we'll craft, the images around sort of that vigilante Batman like figure, all
Yeah.
alone in the cave. You look how he's dealing with his grief. He's become an awesome crime fighter. And, the old images of like the Marlboro man. So not only is it killing us and we're killing each other, but then we glorify it on top of it. Wow.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
To
You'd
see
think we'd
itself
wake
to
up by now, but we're still sleeping.